Okay, let us start. This is the the last panel, the last roundtable that we have after a quite demanding day. So it's quite a challenge for me to make sure that all the speakers that we have today, so we have a quite dynamic interaction with them. The main objective of this panel that we call Report Back from Country Consultations is precisely to share with you the results, the outcome of an exercise that we conducted that the UN Resident and Humanitarian Coordinator conducted in the 5 countries affected by the crisis with the objective of identifying inputs and recommendations for the resilience agenda. So this is something that happened between September and October. We started with Jordan, then we moved to Ankara, then Lebanon. We had simultaneous consultations in Erbil and Baghdad. And in the case of Egypt, it was an ongoing process that took almost 2 months of consultation with various partners. And in the case of Syria, the process was guided by the UN Resident Coordinator, Humanitarian Coordinator, and it involved the UN country team. So what you have just said as part of the first day of the Resilience Development Forum, and what you will see tomorrow as part of the ministerial segment of the RDF, is the result of all of these consultations. In these consultations, we identified key topics such as aid architecture for resilience, social stability, and engagement of the private sector. We produced a series of generic papers that inform this country consultation. So the RDF, in fact, is a result of this exercise that involved governments in the region, the UN, national NGOs, the private sector, and civil society organizations, and of course donors that participated in these country consultations. So the methodology of this panel is quite simple. We have, as members of the panel, representatives from the government, from the UN. You have no more than 10 minutes to present the outcome of the country consultations, and we very much appreciate if you established linkages between the country consultations and the resilience agenda. Let me just introduce the members of this panel. So we have from Egypt, Anita Nirodi, the UN Resident Coordinator in Egypt, that is joined by the representative from the Egyptian government, is Councillor Ahmed Hafez, the Department of Arab Affairs, Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We have Lebanon, the Senior Advisor of the Minister of Social Affairs, Hala Helou. From Iraq, Jassim Mohammed Al-Haf, the Minister for Displacement and Migration, Federal Government of Iraq. Mr. Kak Haider, Director General, Development Coordination and Cooperation, Ministry of Planning, Regional Government of Kurdistan. Madame Ms. Liz Grande is the UN Resident Coordinator, Humanitarian Coordinator in Iraq. From Turkey, Kamal Malhotra, Resident Coordinator, with a representative from the Turkish government. Ms. Zeynep Yilmaz is the first Secretary Director General for Migration, Asylum, and Refugees, Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And from Jordan, we have a representative from the Minister of MOPIC, and is also joined by Feda Garaibe. And we are waiting for our colleagues. Well, now we have some risk representing the Syria UN country team. So we will ask. We will start by Egypt, Anita, and representative from the government, Councillor Ahmed Hafez. You have 2 options. You can come to the lecture or perhaps from the podium. You decide. Okay, good, excellent. Welcome.
So good afternoon. I'll try to be very brief and concise with regard to, I guess, very exhaustive consultations between us and the United Nations as represented by the UNDP. So as to the main three topics of the RDF, aid architecture, social inclusiveness, and private sector engagement, the Egyptian government, as represented by the Foreign Ministry of Egypt, we've tried to give our preliminary input and comments with the objective of the general mapping of the challenges and the road ahead, and trying to express our country specificities in addressing the main topics. In that context, it would be a remiss if I don't really thank Anita Nirodi and the competent team of hers in UN Cairo, especially UNDP, and closely working with us in the Egyptian Foreign Ministry, engaging in these consultations. Now, as to our ideas, as I said, I'll just focus right now, firstly, on the first topic, which is aid architecture. While we believe that efforts have been exerted by all, still plans remain underfunded and much is yet to be financed as pledged. And I guess this is a no-brainer because throughout the past, the whole day, and with many here reading the literature with the 3RP reports, I think all of us have this as a common denominator, that there is underfunding and there's much that remains to be financed as pledged. For Egypt, my country, the influx of the Syrian refugees has indeed put the government under stress with limited domestic resources and an economy already affected by what was directly witnessed in Egypt by the Arab Spring. Of course, again, this in turn has impacted the Egyptian economy, which is already strained as it faces the growth of subsidies to services and goods in various sectors, which also the Syrians share with us, in addition to the access granted free of charge to the Syrian refugee population in Egypt, their access into the educational and health sectors, equating their treatment to that of Egyptian citizens with its related costs, posing a growing budgetary problem. Now, another point here that I need to make is that with low visibility and predictability with regard to international funding, our strategic national planning in Egypt becomes very difficult. Again, I think this is shared by almost all, with a continued reliance on national public investment and resort once again to the host government's national budget, in this case Egypt, again in turn exacerbating the deficit. So one would ask, so what do you want as Egypt? We've already sort of explained the symptoms of the disease here. What do we want? What we want in Egypt is direct budget support. We see this as a key element, at least at this stage. And we believe also that funding mechanisms need to be quick in responding to the immediate nature of this crisis. We believe that shying away from confronting the issue as is will not make it disappear in any way. Already, our national intervention in Egypt is clear, with the provision of free of charge access to, as I said, educational and health services, along with sharing citizen subsidies with the residing Syrian refugees. Hence, once again, direct budget support, as I believe, is required to share the financial budgetary burden associated with the sharing of subsidies and services, as well as possibly sector budget support in backing the efforts. Having said that, I would like to also make another point very clear. In Egypt, we sort of feel that there's this excessive weight being put to the issue of how host governments need to always show the ability to be absorptive and be able to manage and prove that we are transparent in the way we manage resources. Now, we believe that even though we understand such a fear and management risks, we feel that such an unwarranted, excessive fear of financial mismanagement by the host country, be it Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, Turkey, Egypt, is a bit unwarranted, as I said, and it only delays the needed actions. Lengthy discussions about managing associated risks is only counterproductive and overlooks the immediate nature of this crisis. The risks associated with underfunding are also significant, possibly leading to much more adverse consequences in light of the nature of the Syrian refugee crisis. Of course, it is understood that direct budgetary support is in the sphere of our national management and auditing, which is the case with any other country, of course. But donors and development agencies, of course, need to be reminded, thank you, that only through Egypt's national will and its own management did it open its doors for the hundreds of thousands of Syrian refugees. It was also through our national decision to implement an equality of access to our health and educational facilities, way before anybody else spoke about, resilience or 3RP or the reporting, which we highly appreciate. But it was the initiative of the government years ago. This deserves, as we believe in Egypt, deserves trust that direct budgetary support will be channeled properly, whether from Egypt or any other country, most notably Jordan and others who have already taken the initiative in going ahead with what they're doing without any, let's say, assessment of possible future risks or that. So we understand where a lot of the donor agencies and a lot of the international financial institutions are coming from. However, excessive weight on that point is only hindering the whole process, as we believe. Now, actionably speaking, aside from basically analyzing the various options like multi-partner trust funds, the objective still remains that whatever the vehicle may be when it comes to assistance to host governments like ours, there is a need, as I said, for budget support in general. And we may also look at, for example, avenues like debt to development, or any other instrument to reduce our indebtedness while funding development projects for the local community and the Syrians who are residing with us. But any other option which revolve around our continued borrowing, like donor-backed bonds or other similar ideas, regardless of how donors may buy down your loan charges, and you can bring all these macro finance and macroeconomic experts, which I'm not one of them, of course, but just seeing that this entails borrowing by the government, then it only just exacerbates the situation and is unsustainable. Continuing borrowing as a principle for us is not really a viable solution and does not genuinely reflect a true burden sharing by donors. However, we believe that there may be also other avenues like financing tangible projects. A clear project that, for example, you can go ahead and attract donors to finance projects like building of schools. So you have a school that you build, it becomes, I guess in the private sector jargon would be an EPC contract. You go ahead, you engineer, you procure, and you construct, and you have a school that absorbs refugee population alongside the local community, and you can also build a number of hospitals to accommodate health requirements. I'll fast forward here to the second issue, which is social inclusiveness. Now, I really don't have much to say on that in that respect. I mean, in Egypt, we take pride in our success with social inclusiveness. The Syrian refugees in Egypt, they live amongst our Egyptian community in various parts of the country. No refugee camps present in the country for the Syrians. There is, in fact, I think, a great deal of positive social interaction and vitality between them. There has not been any indications of the nature that would threaten community security or alarm us in any way. No tensions have surfaced in response to the equality in treatment between the Egyptians and Syrians with regard to health and educational facilities. But I may say, to be also candid and frank, maybe from the refugee perspective, there is also a positive perception in terms of non-discrimination owing to their access to such public services, albeit sometimes such services are not really of superior quality. And I must make this very clear. They have access to our health services, but you may not have the best health service anyway. But then again, it remains to be what the citizens of Egypt and the refugees face alike. So this is our public health system, and they will just face it as we do. But whatever we charge for our citizens, they are equated to us in that case. Now, with their access to education, not just schooling, but to university and possibly even postgraduate studies, I think there has been a heightened level of social interaction. And I must stress again that their enrollment in university is also free of charge. So this is a soil for strong resilience. Going quickly to the private sector, which is the last issue. Even though in Egypt, I can't really say that there are institutional programs that we have established or crafted in terms of reaching out to the private sector, and I think the idea itself as originating from the international community, we believe it's a good idea. We would like to build on that. There are already successful stories in Egypt of Syrians investing through setting up small shops and restaurants and partnering with locals for even bigger projects, commercial and industrial projects. This has not been hindered by the government, and we have allowed for such investments, and it does create jobs for the Syrians, if not also local Egyptians. There is a need indeed for international donors and development agencies to consider setting up programs that may finance projects or fund even seed money for such entrepreneurs, Syrian entrepreneurs, in conjunction with Egyptians, possibly with an emphasis on small and medium enterprises. So all of that, I believe, is a key element that we can build on. Other, I guess, creative ideas and schemes that can be thought of, I'm not going to go through all of it, but I'm happy that Mr. Anis Aklimandos, the president of the American Chamber in Cairo, is here with us today, and he will be talking tomorrow in the panel with regard to the private sector. So I think he can elaborate more on the ideas going forward with that. I guess that's as concise as I can be with the whole subject, and I'll leave my friend Anita to.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Hafed, and thank you so much for this quite interesting and I think challenging analysis of partnerships and relationship with the government of Egypt and the international community, in the sense that having as perhaps a preferred option budget support, and looking at the way that, let's say, there is a new concept of international burden sharing that is not engaging, let's say, any type of borrowing by the government to address an external crisis. And then we call Anita Nirodi, resident coordinator in Egypt.
Thank you very much, Gustavo, and I'm going to be brief because we have a long list of speakers, but let me just thank the government of Egypt, who we've been consulting closely with on these national consultations, and I just want to highlight perhaps 3 or 4 issues to complement what Councillor Hafiz has said. Overall, there is strong support for the resilience agenda and the need to think outside the box in terms of how to deal with the impact of the Syrian crisis. The other issue that has come out in the consultations is there cannot be a one-size-fits-all approach, and that the agenda needs to take into consideration country specificities and country contexts. Councillor Hafiz has referred to the fact that the 3RP remains largely underfunded, particularly in Egypt, the resilience component being only 13% funded, and there's a clear understanding that traditional financing models having separate tracks for humanitarian and development responses is not working. There's a need for a much more integrated aid architecture, and there is a need for financing that is much more predictable in terms of multi-year funding and flexible for resilience issues. One interesting element that came out of our discussions was the role of philanthropy, and in a sense how there's so much potential in this area. And one of the suggestions was to create a resilience and SDG philanthropy affinity group for the Arab region. because there is tremendous potential to contribute to resilience issues. But I think it was not only about having an integrated aid architecture and a plan, but it's how we implement. How can we implement in a way where we're not competing with each other, where we can actually maximize and make greater impact and have more efficient use of resources. There was a huge number of suggestions on how to facilitate interactions between the refugees and host communities, and there was a lot of issues that I'm very happy to see resonate with the livelihoods panel that took place, and also with the panel that took place on gender issues, which was really looking at women not only in terms of being disproportionately impacted by the crisis, but also as agents of change. And this is also something that has come up in the discussion. I'm not going to touch on the private sector except to say that as far as Egypt is concerned, we're really having a forward-looking approach, because there was a call for a much more sustained engagement with the private sector, and there's lots of ideas emerging. We have Mr. Acrimandos here who's going to be talking about it a little bit more tomorrow. But let me come to two interesting issues that came up. Haven't heard much of it today, but one was the really important role that media can play to develop and implement the resilience agenda, to promote a different and a better understanding of the vulnerability of refugees and host communities, to promote better social interactions, and also to remove the stigma that is associated with refugees and to enhance partnerships. So the media has a very important role to play. And lastly, another very interesting element that came out of the discussions was the power of arts and culture to transform the way that refugees and host communities deal with their realities, and empower them to be able to engage in ways that are very peaceful and positive, but also to imagine solutions and to work on solutions on the challenges they face. And there could be a lot of potential in this area as well. So let me stop there and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anita. I think that we had a quite comprehensive description from the UN, the international community, and from the government on the main outcomes of these country consultations in Egypt. And then we move to Iraq. We have a robust delegation from Iraq, and we start with Liz Grande, UN Resident Coordinator and Humanitarian Coordinator.
Gustavo, thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be joined by His Excellency the Minister of Migration and Displacement for the federal government of Iraq, and also by His Excellency the Director General from the Ministry of Planning in the Kurdistan Regional Government. In the case of Iraq, we had two national consultations. One was in Baghdad and one was in Erbil. There were more than 150 people that participated in these simultaneous consultations. We brought together colleagues from the government, colleagues from civil society, colleagues from the private sector. We had community-based organizations. We had national NGOs, international NGOs, donor countries, member states, and then the UN family. We spent a lot of time in our national consultations trying to understand what we meant by resilience. In the case of Iraq, we're coming new to this resilience agenda. The crisis has been so overwhelming and so engulfing that we've been simply trying to deal with that for the last 14 to 16 months. So in talking about resilience, we spent a lot of time talking about what we meant, noting, of course, that in Arabic there isn't a direct translation. What we collectively agreed was that as we defined it, as we understood it, the resilience agenda was about helping people who are in trouble to cope with the crisis, to recover from the crisis, and then to become strong enough so that they can deal with whatever trouble comes toward them again. And not only do we look to help individual families become more resilient, but also the governments themselves. So help the governments to cope with the crisis, to recover from it, and then to build their own strength so that they can deal with whatever else may happen in Iraq. Once we agreed on the definition, the focus of our consultations then shifted to understanding collectively together the nature of the crisis that we were facing. And here, all of us agreed that, number one, the crisis in Iraq is getting worse. We also agreed that there are many more people that are going to be in trouble than are currently in trouble. And just to put this into perspective, out of a country of more than 34 million people, right now 10 million people rely on some form of humanitarian assistance in order to survive. We also note that unlike other countries in the region that are dealing with the crisis, in the case of Iraq, the refugee population is really small, 250,000 people. The IDP population is huge. There are more than 4 million Iraqis who are currently displaced, including 3.2 million who have been displaced since the rise of ISIL, and 1 million people who were displaced already, largely as a result of the sectarian violence in 2006 and 2008. We also recognized when we were describing the situation to ourselves that the environment wherein the crisis lay is becoming really complicated. There are lots of regional actors with very complex agendas all at play simultaneously. We of course acknowledge that funds are drying up. The government of Iraq, the Kurdistan regional government, are facing massive fiscal deficits and gaps this year. The donor community is focused very much on the Syrian crisis. We're an adjunct to that. We happen to think that should be adjusted. But the fact is that we are often the last funded when donors make crucial decisions about how they're going to support the region. For all of these reasons, we recognize that we don't have a choice in Iraq. We simply have got to work differently, that resilience has to become a key part of what we do in a way that hasn't so far been the case. So, when the consultations were discussing the challenges, essentially we agreed on 4 of them. 1, the crisis is protracted in the case of Iraq. We had all hoped that ISIL was going to be degraded and defeated, and the crisis would be ended, and Iraq would be moving on a path of reform and toward prosperity. We now all have to accept that the crisis is protracted. We also have to accept that we can't predict what will happen. The situation is so volatile and so unpredictable that whatever kind of programming we do has to be based on that understanding. Thirdly, we all agreed that we have insufficient capacities to respond to what we're facing. Government doesn't have the capacity, the international community doesn't have the capacity, local communities are struggling. Collectively, we're overwhelmed. And then finally, a point that's already been raised by our colleagues from Egypt, we have insufficient support for this. Insufficient support. You have a country right now on the front line fighting ISIL. Right? Fighting ISIL on behalf of the whole international community, and they need help. They need support, and it's simply insufficient what's coming in. We also were very frank with ourselves that the support that is coming in is not always directly aligned with the government priorities. This is a matter of coordination, and we're definitely trying to tighten that up. That was the consensus that we shared between the 2 consultations, and if you allow me to please offer the microphone to His Excellency the Minister.
شكرا ليز. شكرا لجميع الحاضرين والإخوان في النقاشات. صراحة قبل أن أذهب إلى الموضوع العراقي فقط أريد توضيح لوضع اللاجئين في العراق. نحن في إقليم كردستان وبقية مناطق العراق استقبلنا أكثر من 250 ألف لاجئ من سوريا. هذا العدد بالنسبة لنا يعني استقبلناهم في وقتها بشكل جيد جدا. كحكومة عراقية وكحكومة الإقليم قدمنا المساعدات اللازمة. يعني كانت المساعدات الشعبية من الجماهيرية وحملات جمع التبرع يعني بشكل والتعاطف بشكل جدا جدا كبير مع لاجئي الشعب السوري في العراق، بحيث أنا أتذكر يعني أحد الباعة المتجولين كان قد ربح حوالي أقل من $10 باليوم. يعني هذه $10 اشترى به طبقتين من البيض وجاب كتبرع يعني للاجئين السوريين في وقتها. يعني الأطفال تبرعوا بادخارهم الدخيلة والقاصة مالتهم مال اليومية اللي يجمعونها، تبرعوا بهذا. كلنا تعاطفنا. والآن وضع اللاجئين السوريين بسبب الضغط الذي على الحكومة، ضغط أكثر من 3 ملايين نازح، صراحة نحتاج إلى دعم أكبر للاجئين السوريين في العراق. فيما يخص الوضع العراقي، السيدة ليز وضحت كل شيء. يعني فقط أريد أن أشير إلى أن موازنة العراق موازنة يعني في ظل عجز جدا جدا كبير بسبب انخفاض سعر النفط، بحيث أننا مهما حاولنا لا نستطيع الإيفاء بالتزاماتنا المالية تجاه النازحين. يعني أعلى نقطة وأعلى مستوى يمكن أن نصل إليه هو تغطية ثلث احتياجات النازحين المالية، لأن العدد كبير والاحتياجات كثيرة، ويبقى البقية على جهود الدول المانحة وعلى جهود منظمات الأمم المتحدة وعلى كيفية التعامل مع المال القليل والاستفادة القصوى من هذا المال القليل، ويبقى أيضا على عمليات وحروب تحرير المناطق. يعني كلما استطعنا تحرير مناطق أكثر كلما زادت نسبة العودة إلى المناطق الأصلية، وبالتالي خفت أزمة النزوح. في هذه الأشهر القليلة الأخيرة استطعنا أن نرجع أكثر من 80,000 عائلة، ما يساوي حوالي 400,000 نسمة إلى مناطقها الأصلية. نعمل على هذا الملف، وهذا الملف بالنسبة لنا كحكومة أحد أهم الملفات، لأننا صراحة لا نريد أن تبقى هذه المناطق خالية من السكان ومدمرة من حيث الخدمات والبنى التحتية. لا أريد الخوض في التفاصيل الأخرى، أترك المجال للأستاذ حتى يوضح بقية النقاط. شكرا.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Really, we want to share with you three main priorities. The first one is information and coordination cooperation issue. The information became a mass, and really it is became an area that everyone is looking for, and we didn't find an accurate and in-time information. The idea is that to involve more ICT tools and to have one-stop shop information. We have in Ministry of Planning one staff only looking for 5 or 6 websites on daily basis, looking at Relief Web, Humanitarian Info, UNHCR, IOM, and the government websites. So this is an issue that we have to have one-stop shop. And transparency is very important in sharing the information, just to avoid duplication and to minimize the cost, and everyone to be aware where we are, and otherwise we cannot see our future. The second point is institutional development. So far, it has been some programs through United Nations and other international agencies to develop and to support institutions of the government, public institutions. So it is very important to look at the priority of the government and look at the needs of the people from the host community and the vulnerable groups who identify the government itself. So institutional development is very important in this regard. We need, for example, in all Iraq, we rarely find some good data analyzers. Data is collected and it is just judged, and it is not easy to make decision upon because there hasn't been a good analysis. So data analysis, data management is one of the areas that's important. Secondly, the GIS, for example, the mapping. And if we ask how many projects of the government is suspended or ongoing in a district close to a camp where there is a lot of IDPs or refugees. So mapping that together to see how we can find a project will be benefit for both. We cannot easily indicate on map and express that. The third point is that private sector development. The private sector is not alone, really. We have to say that civil society and media as well, beside the other entities, which is important to be involved in their role. But private sector, it is very difficult to work in current situation of physical problems. So we have to make it some lessons learned. I was at Board of Investment in 2006. The first visit before starting the Board of Investment, we visited Jordan for Jordan Investment Board. They advised us do market analysis, and we didn't. We didn't listen carefully, and it was the lesson that it was supposed we do it. So we did some investments and some projects. All the doors were open for investment, and then we became something that we did something wrong in housing projects. So this is, we have to make market analysis. What's the opportunities? What is the priorities? How we create jobs for the people? How do the competition will affect the host and the IDPs, refugees? How we can bring them together? How we minimize the tension between them? How to do so many things together in creating jobs. We should, if you wait as UN agencies and international agencies to leave the government to think about new tools and models, it might take a lot of time, but it is not the first time you are doing resilience. Just bring things on the table without doing so many meetings, so many conferences, and so on. Please tell us this is a successful story, and we can follow up easily. And models like public-private partnership, BOT, BOOT, and others, direct investment, foreign direct investment. The last point is the banking within the private sector. The banking is very important to be encouraging to have some loans financing the private sector. Otherwise, the private sector will be handicapped with these physical problems to wait for the government until they will together dance a good dance. So it is good to be improving that. That was the three priority: information, institutional development, and private sector, civil society. One with media. One recommendation out of these three is UNHCR is a leading agency for refugees. And one day the refugees from KRG, they were been supporting IDPs. They were been providing some support to the IDPs. Their life was better. So it means that we should find a leading agency for IDPs as well, or at least for this resilience program, which is for host IDPs and refugee issue. So leading agency is very important. We suffered a lot from lack of finance in HRP, and impact it was very high. So in case there will be no timely funding available, neither by the governments, especially the responsibility of the IDPs are the governments, so we should find a way. My personal recommendation, it is not like a governmental official, later on they will say, no one should say this is the government of Kurdistan. My personal recommendation is to find a kind of Security Council resolution to fund through Oil for Food, as the program Oil for Food, in spite of its corruption and lack of transparency. So, but it was a high impact on the communities. Even it reached very little, but it was in time, and at least it was granted. And that fund, which was being requested for HRP, $500 million dollars. If we say on an annual basis $1 billion, it is 1% of the budget of all of Iraq as estimated previously. So let's think about how we force the governments to commit and to contribute and to be a part of donation besides the international. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Iraq. Thank you, Liz, for coming up with this new Iraqi definition of resilience. No, and I took note that it's helping people and institutions in troubles to cope with and recover from shocks, from crisis. Thank you so much for this recognition of the fact that resilience seems to be perhaps the right approach when we work in a highly volatile and fluid context in which we are dealing with unpredictability, and at the same time we need to start focusing on the local capacities and local system delivery. Thank you so much, Dr. Hayek. Although you have stressed some conflicting topics like who is going to deal with the IDPs, the leading agency, and the Food for Oil initiative, but let's say this is part, I think, of the debate that we have on options for Iraq. And now I would like to ask a colleague from Jordan, Omar Mousseh, advisor of the Ministry of Planning and International Cooperation. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Gustavo. مساء الخير للجميع السادة الحضور الكرام. يسعدني أن ألتقي بكم اليوم على هامش منتدى تعزيز المنع للأزمة السورية للدول الجوار إلى سوريا، وذلك بهدف مشاركة الخبرات والتحضيرات للمنتدى. الحضور الكرام، كما تعلمون يعتبر الأردن من أكبر الدول المستضيفة للاجئين في العالم، وفي حين يأتي الدولة الثانية بالنسبة لاستضافة اللاجئين السوريين، حيث التزم الأردن وعبر ال5 سنوات الماضية بتوفير الخدمات الأساسية والاحتياجات الضرورية للاجئين السوريين، الأمر الذي انعكس على مستوى وطبيعة الخدمات المقدمة للمواطنين الأردنيين، وخصوصا في المحافظات التي تشهد كثافة عالية لتجمع اللاجئين السوريين، والتي أصلا هي كانت تعاني من تدني في مستوى الخدمات وارتفاع في نسب الفقر والبطالة. لقد قام الأردن خلال العام 2015 وبالتنسيق مع المجتمع الدولي والهيئات المانحة بإعداد خطة الاستجابة 2015 والمعروفة GRP 2015، لكنه وللأسف ولغاية هذا التاريخ فإن حجم التمويل لهذه الخطة لم يتجاوز 35% من إجمالي المبلغ المطلوب. وحاليا أيضا تعمل الحكومة وإحنا في المراحل النهائية للخطة القادمة والتي سوف تغطي الأعوام الثلاث القادمة من 2016-2018، وذلك بالتنسيق مع برنامج الأمم المتحدة الإنمائي UNDP، حيث اشتملت هذه الخطة على مكونات رئيسية ثلاث، هي دعم المجتمعات المستضيفة ودعم اللاجئين بالإضافة إلى الموازنة العامة للدولة. حيث تم أيضا الأخذ بعين الاعتبار ما يلي: إن الأزمة السورية والتي طال أمدها لا يمكن التعامل معها أو معالجتها فقط من خلال المساعدات الإنسانية، فلا بد من التركيز على دعم القطاعات الصحية والتعليمية والقطاعات الحيوية الأخرى والتي تأثرت باللجوء السوري. أيضا لابد من المحافظة على الموارد الطبيعية والمحدودة في المجتمعات المستضيفة مثل قطاع الطاقة والمياه، والتي أصبح يشكل تحديا حقيقيا في المجتمعات المكتظة باللجوء السوري. أيضا لابد من مراجعة السياسات التمويلية وإعادة النظر بهيكلة المساعدات، وخاصة المتعلقة بالدول ذات الدخل المتوسط. خامسا، ضرورة التركيز على الدور الحكومي في قيادة خطة تعزيز المنعى بهدف تعظيم الاستفادة من الموارد المحدودة أصلا والتركيز على الأولويات. السادة الحضور، بهدف تعزيز مبدأ المساءلة والشفافية، فقد قامت الحكومة الأردنية بتفعيل نظام إلكتروني للأزمة السورية جورس، حيث يقوم هذا النظام بتوفير المتابعة للبرامج والمشاريع الممولة من خلال الجهات المانحة، وكذلك يبين حجم الإنجاز في هذه المشاريع. فيما يتعلق أيضا في سبل تعزيز وتقوية منهجية تعزيز المنع للمجتمعات المستضيفة، فإن الحكومة ستبني على الدروس المستفادة والخبرات المتراكمة خلال ال5 سنوات الماضية، والتأكيد بشكل خاص على ما يلي: مبدأ المشاركة في إعداد وتنفيذ ومتابعة البرامج والمشاريع. 2. إشراك واستهداف المرأة والشباب والفئات الأقل حظا في كافة الأنشطة ذات العلاقة. أهمية المشاركة في تحمل الأعباء من المجتمع الدولي على المستوى المتوسط وطويل الأمد. أيضا بناء نظام معلوماتي دقيق يهدف إلى المساعدة في صنع القرار وتعزيز مبدأ الشفافية والمساعدة. شكرا لكم.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Omar Nosir, from the MOPIC Humanitarian Relief Unit. And now we give the floor to Hela Helu, a senior advisor of the Minister of Social Affairs from Lebanon.
Thank you, Gustavo. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm not going to go into many numbers because I think that there are a lot of similar things going on between all the countries, especially a lot of similarity between Lebanon and Jordan in what is happening. Regarding the consultations that we had people from all around Lebanon. We had from all sectors, from the representatives from the government, the different ministries, different government agencies, UN agencies, NGOs, local NGOs, international NGOs, donors, and as well as the private sector. It was a very informative meeting. It was a good meeting where dialogue brought together all of these partners for the first time around the same table. And I think one of the main things that everybody agreed upon is that this was a very good platform for dialogue that should be considered as first step and not an end result by itself. So one of the results of the consultations was that this should be a first step in consultations to come that would feed into the planning process that is taking place. Lebanon today is finalizing its updated version of the Lebanon Crisis Response Plan, which was for 2015-2016. Today, we're tailoring the 2016 version a bit more to respond to the dynamic situation that's at hand, in a way that we strengthen government leadership and the actual support of the UN and the international community and NGOs for this leadership. So the way we see it is these consultations would definitely were feeding into the agenda of the RDF, but at the same time they are there to help us in our own planning. It's for the national interest. This will also help us to feed into our next phase of the planning, since we're working on a more integrated approach where we don't talk about refugees alone and Lebanon alone. So we're talking about an integrated approach where we need to support Lebanon so that Lebanon can continue to support its host community as well as everybody who's residing in it. There was, of course, an insistence from everybody that we need to follow a human rights approach in providing services. This is a priority that everybody in Lebanon respects. However, considering the numbers of people in Lebanon, today we have about 1.5 million Syrians residing in the country in comparison to 4 million Lebanese, in addition to about 500,000 Palestinians and some other nationalities. So we're talking about a very large number. We're talking about an increase in 30% in our population in just 3 years. This needs us to start focusing in a different approach, and this brings a couple of things into light on which light was shed during these consultations. First of all, the need to focus on host communities while maintaining all support to refugees, but the true need to focus on host communities. The second one is economy. What we believe is economic stability helps stability in everything. If we talk about social stability, one of the main problems that might cause tensions is economic pressure on everybody. Pressure in Lebanon is increasing on the Lebanese as well as the refugees as well as everybody. So economy and host community come to the forefront. When we talk about host community, we talk about the individuals, we talk about our national services, we talk about our municipalities in particular. So municipalities have come up as one of the main actors that need to be supported. And when we talk about support to municipalities, we talk about gaining new capacities. We talk about introducing new policing systems for these municipalities. And we talk about building on existing projects, such as the Lebanon Host Communities Support Project that is already up and running by the Ministry of Social Affairs and UNDP. And we talk about unemployment, the real increase in unemployment, the level of the Lebanese youth in particular, but also unemployment in Lebanon, and the need for a targeted employment approach, which is now not available. And this was really highlighted by the private sector. Also, strengthening support for SMEs has also come up strongly. And there comes, as everybody might know, there are a lot of topics in Lebanon that are very sensitive. And among these sensitive topics is one of the topics that you've had the consultations about today, which is livelihoods and job creation. And this has been and will continue to be one of the most sensitive and most debated topics in Lebanon. It was one of the topics that was truly debated during the consultations. And Lebanon as a government has one position on this. We talk about investment. The true and absolute need for investment in our country, investment in our economy, investment in our infrastructure. When this investment takes place, then we talk about livelihood opportunities. When we are talking about a creation of jobs for refugees in a labor market that is inexistent, this cannot happen. This is all coming at a time, and the consultations were coming at a time when, less than a week before, our national bank announced that the economic growth in Lebanon has reached 0. And this is a very frightening number for us. So we cannot really talk about livelihoods as a standalone thing. We can talk about it, and we can talk about generating jobs when we talk about generating jobs for Lebanese, for everybody, through actual investment in our economy. This was one of the most debatable issues, but it's an issue that we will be putting on the table in every single forum that we're at. We need investment in these host countries, and investment needs to be a true investment that responds to the priorities of the countries, responds to the needs of these countries. And this is coming also at a time when funding, like every other country, is at a minimum, and especially that funding is not coming to support the budgets, the national budgets too. So one more thing that came also was the need to support and maintaining and developing the national systems and the national services. This is a very brief summary of what happened in Lebanon. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Hala. And I had the opportunity of taking part in the consultations in Beirut, in Lebanon. And I would like to highlight one of the points that was presented by Hala, the fact that this country consultation, by the fact that it was a discussion on policy options, it was a strategic discussion, was a quite rich opportunity in terms of reframing the existing Lebanon's crisis response plan and bring a sort of multi-year planning. And at the same time, this clarification in the sense that an eventual accommodation of refugees is conditioned by this, let's say, strong investment in national system, in economy. It means creating an enabling environment for the eventual absorption or temporary absorption of refugees in the social fabric and labor market. Thank you very much, Hala. And then we have our colleagues from Turkey.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Gustavo. Turkey hosts the largest number of documented refugees in the world, with approximately 2.2 million Syrians currently registered. And the numbers we've agreed with the government for the end of 2016 is that this number of just Syrians alone is likely to rise to 2.75 million by the end of 2016. Most of these refugees, approximately 90%, live outside of camps in the community. So we're talking about over 2 million in 2016 who will be outside of camps. Turkey is uniquely positioned because of its geographical location, because it's got a 901 kilometer border shared with Syria, but it also has a land bridge to Europe. As a result of this, Turkey will continue to receive a large influx of refugees as long as the Syrian crisis and conflict continues. The government of Turkey has been extremely generous so far and should be commended for hosting refugees in such large numbers and keeping largely an open door policy while also providing humanitarian assistance, and a new temporary protection legislation as well as an asylum legislation which came into effect in the middle of this crisis. It's estimated by Turkey that it's spent about $8 billion in the last 4.5 years. And clearly now Turkey, the situation is one where this generosity and its capacity has its limits. And there's an urgent need for much greater international burden sharing with Turkey, which is currently under discussion, particularly with the Europeans. Clearly, humanitarian action alone is no longer sufficient, and we need a sort of paradigm shift. This resilience, depending on how it's defined, because sometimes it can be defined to mean anything and everything. So I think there needs to be a much tighter definition of resilience, has to be at the center of the future response, certainly in Turkey. And I believe Turkey has the capacity to be able to play an important role in such a response. Let me now just focus on some of the key challenges as well as the recommendations that came out from the consultation. I'll focus on the key challenges first, and in the area of the resilience of the aid architecture, 5 points. One, that there's limited funding and an urgent need for international burden sharing. Secondly, there's insufficient data for evidence-based decision making. Third, that there is not yet an overarching national policy linking humanitarian and development action. Fourth, coordination is a challenge with so many different actors. And fifth, the existing aid instruments need to be tailored much more for Turkey's context, which they're not. In terms of the private sector framework, 4 points. There's certainly insufficient clarity about what the private sector should actually be doing. Secondly, the private sector has insufficient knowledge about the refugee needs, and in a very politicized context are somewhat hesitant to get involved. Third, there's a need for an enabling regulatory framework for the private sector to facilitate its response to the crisis. And fourth, the whole issue of PPP, public-private partnerships, mechanisms have not yet been widely promoted or discussed in this context. In the area of social stability, a number of points came up in the consultation. First, there's limited information again for evidence-based policy and programming. Syrian and host communities need to be much more actively involved in shaping the interventions. There is a need to improve access to public services. The absence of work permits for Syrians under the temporary protection legislation limits their access to employment. Turkey does have temporary protection legislation, but it still needs to be brought into effect for temporary work permits through enabling secondary legislation. There is insufficient access to education, vocational training, and inadequate accreditation of skills. And last but not least, the language barrier is a major constraint. In this respect, Turkey is quite different from many of the other countries, or all of the other countries, because Syrians speak Arabic, while in Turkey the predominant everyday language is Turkish. When we come to recommendations in the area of aid architecture, there's clearly a need to establish much better dialogue for evidence sharing and for evidence-based programming. There's a need to strengthen intersectoral coordination through intergovernmental working groups, and Turkey is already, I think, beginning to take some action in this regard. I think Zeynep will mention that. There's a need to move from immediate crisis responses to short and medium-term planning. And there's a need to establish joint donor and host country dialogues and much more flexible funding mechanisms for the context of a country like Turkey. In the area of private sector engagement, there needs to be a mapping and matching exercise of the available skills of the Syrian refugee workforce with employment opportunities. Secondly, skills development of vulnerable communities needs to be prioritized much more. And third, there's a need for the private sector to basically be brought on board through what I'd said earlier, the enabling regulatory framework and the incentives to get them engaged. On social stability, the need to adopt a human rights-based approach, which was mentioned, particularly to service delivery. Prioritize education and schooling. Turkey has up to 500,000 children, Syrian children of school age, outside of school. This is a huge challenge. The need for advocacy and awareness raising for refugees on their rights to access services. Include Syrians in decision making, improve targeted assistance to vulnerable refugees, strengthen data collection and monitoring systems, and establish multi-sector coordination mechanisms. So there's a long list of challenges, and there's an equally long list of recommendations that came out from the consultations. And I believe so what we were told was there were about approximately 100 people, again very multi-stakeholder, and in many ways Gustavo was there. This was the first of its kind, where you had all the stakeholders discussing this, and I think it was an important contribution, but clearly just a start. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kamal. Representative from the government of Turkey, you would like to comment? Yes, please. You have the floor.
Thank you. Hello to everyone. I know that you are tired in the end of the day, and I'll keep it very short. First of all, I want to thank Mr. Malhotra and his team for their work in Ankara, in Turkey. We attach importance to the results of these national consultations. We will continue our dialogue, our close dialogue with UN agencies for the well-being of both Syrians in our country and also for the resilience of our host community, of course. I want to attract your attention to the number of the Syrians in Turkey. You know that, as Mr. Malhotra mentioned, the number 2.2 million, over 2.2 million actually, the number of Syrians in Turkey is very high, and it determines, it shows us that the need is so high, and the needs also diversify. As you know that we are in its 5th year, the crisis in its 5th year, needs also change, and of course there are some problems because of this huge population and because of this long period, because of the protracted crisis situation. There might be some shortcomings, but we are open to listen to UN agencies and of course to NGOs, and we'll together come over these problems. We believe we'll do our best. Actually, Turkey really does its best in this crisis situation and will continue to do so. For instance, with regard to this coordination, lack of coordination issue, recently in Turkey there has been a new structure within the Prime Ministry for this coordination. It's a coordinator body which brings together all relevant institutions inside Turkey, better management of the needs of the investments are planned in this body, and we hope that this problem also will soon get over. Thank you for listening, and if you have questions, I'll try to answer.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Yilmaz. I remember the consultations in Turkey. They took place on the 9th of October, more than the 7th of October. Yeah, 7th of October. And I remember more than 100 participants, almost half of them coming from the private sector, NGOs, and the government. And I also remember the fact that the temporary protection law was referred many times as a sort of best practice, and we know now that you enter into the implementation of this quite challenging new legal framework to respond to the demographic shocks in Turkey. And then we have Samrisk. Samrisk is the UNDP country director in Syria. Consultations in Syria that were carried out with a specific methodology under the leadership of the UN country team. And this exercise is very much related to the new programming process in Syria, in which there is an important integration of humanitarian assistance and development investment. So we ask Samuel to tell us about the consultations in Syria. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Gustavo. I'm sitting in for the resident coordinator, Yaoub Belhalu. Just very briefly, I'll only take 2 or 3 minutes. As Gustavo was saying, we actually started the discussion about how to promote resilience inside Syria back in January of 2015. And that was with the idea of, beyond the humanitarian framework that was ongoing and what might come in 2016, what more can we do? And it was then that there was a decision and a discussion about, is it possible to actually promote a 2-year plan inside Syria rather than 6-month plans or 1-year plans? And the decision was, yes, we could actually do that. So therefore, we actually spent the whole year of 2015 in consultation amongst ourselves and with relevant counterparts to figure out what that 2-year plan might look like. And like Gustavo was saying, we have eventually come to the point where we are now finalizing this 2-year strategic framework for 2016 and 2017 that in effect is a resilience promotion perspective and framework under which all of the UN system would work for these next 2 years. And it focuses on 3 particular areas. One is supporting the capacity of institutions and systems, particularly those that respond to the crisis. Secondly, livelihoods and economic recovery in places where that is actually possible. And a good number or a good measure of this is owing to the massive numbers of either unemployment or poverty or people in need, and the possibility that this is actually doable inside Syria. The third area is about basic service rehabilitation, debris management, solid waste. Now, this is an entire development agenda that didn't actually go away just because there was a crisis in Syria. There's an intense focus on the humanitarian needs. There is no doubt that that actually exists. The numbers are clear. They are bigger than last year, 13.5 million people in need of some kind of humanitarian assistance. But what about everyone else, or what about all of the other needs that actually exist, especially that that's possible? Now, this is not the only discussion that actually took place in relation to if one were to promote a resilience perspective inside Syria, what would that look like? Other consultations have actually been taking place, and interestingly enough, they've yielded the same results. So, for example, whenever there has been a discussion that is ongoing now and will conclude soon about what the next humanitarian plan inside Syria will look like, it has 3 strategic objectives, one of which is promoting the resilience of communities inside Syria. That enables a lot of donors and partners to actually want to engage in supporting resilience inside Syria, to do so either under the strategic framework for 2 years or under the new humanitarian plan for 1 year. They can easily do that. Whenever the whole of Syria colleagues met, there was a discussion and a paper that was circulated about what resilience might look like in a whole of Syria approach. It yielded the same exact results. Support the system response, or the capacity of systems to respond to the crisis, focus on livelihoods, and work on basic services in places where that is actually possible. And if you go one step further, the work that NGOs have been doing, for example, who are working inside Syria, including, for example, the Livelihood Consortium that is pulling together 5 or 6 NGOs doing work inside Syria. This is the same thing that they found. And if you step one step further, the work that ESCO, for example, is doing, the National Agenda for the Future of Syria, what to do now, what to do in the future, yields the same exact results. So basically, the consultation process in different and semi-independent frameworks, when you look at the next couple of years, what you would do to promote the resilience inside Syria of the people and of the communities, it ends up being the 1 or the 2 or 3 things that exist. We are, the UN country team in Syria is completely aware that this is not without risk. There are many challenges, access, funding, partnerships, etc. But the results that you will see in the UNCT booth outside yield a significant amount of potential. And I think that part of the reason we are doing that is to show that if there were a greater investment, results can actually be achieved and a lot more people can be reached. Tomorrow we will share a paper that's been discussed with the UN country team as part of the Syria or Resilience Inside Syria panel. Some of this discussion will be included, and we hope that a good number of you will participate. We inserted ourselves forcefully into the agenda of the Resilience Development Forum, knowing that the crisis actually is inside Syria. The most number of people in need are actually inside Syria, in addition to everybody else who is in need. So in this sense, that's why we have a lot of colleagues here from the UN country team and others working inside Syria as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sam. Resilience Inside Syria is very welcome as part of the RDF, and definitely is not just a conceptual but also a political challenge to back the idea of resilience inside Syria by the fact that it implies preserving human capital, preserving perhaps some of the pockets of stability in Syria, and at the same time taking some risk on the fact of working with local communities, with local organizations. And I think at the end it represents another option of offering Syrians the opportunity to stay in Syria. So directly, another way of addressing the influx of refugees. So I must admit that this is quite a demanding day for all of you. The fact that we have this audience, colleagues, is really that they are very much interested, not just on the country consultation, but getting the voices from the field. So congratulations to you, all of you. And then we move to the question and answers. So questions to the panel. We will have a first round, perhaps just one round of questions. Colleagues? No questions? Quite exhaustive presentation of 6 country consultations at the heart of the crisis. I'm sure that we have some protestation at least. Yes, please. Walid, you have the floor.
I'm just volunteering to rescue him. Well, what we are dealing with here today is a regional crisis, maybe sub-regional crisis. Now, I want to ask you, Gustavo, what is the regionality? Yes, we know that there are countries, they did consultation. Is there how you bring regionality smell to these national consultations? Are you putting some papers together? Are you getting the consensus from countries so that this experience will be summarized in one document that the countries can benefit in the future? How are you benefiting from this?
Good, excellent.
And how you ensure in the future that there is a coordination between the countries, either before or during or after? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Walid. Question number 2. Yes, please.
Hi, thank you. Bradley Firster from the UN Development Group. Very interesting to hear the different context, obviously, in each country where they're applying a very similar resilience lens to your work and to doing it together complementarity with the humanitarian response plans in the respective countries. My question to you there is, to what extent outside of this region do you think a similar approach, appropriate for whatever context, could be applied to another similar protracted crisis situation in a different region?
Thank you very much. A question that relates to the impact of this investment in building resilience in this region, and on the way that we can take advantage of the approach and tools and instruments in other similar crises. Other questions? Yes, please. You introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Ray Jaff. I work with a Swedish organization in Kurdistan. One thing that I find interesting, for example, we all talk about displacement and migration, but there's also another issue that has been raised sometimes, and that's forced returning or forcible returning of these migrants to go back to where they came from, including the IDPs. To what extent are, this question is mainly for the government representatives, to what extent are your respective countries willing to let these refugees stay if they don't want to go back? For example, many of them have migrated to Europe. You know, eventually they will become European in the countries that they have been accepted to. Do your governments have any naturalization policies to allow these refugees to actually become citizens of your countries eventually, after years, after they have learned the language, if they need to, they have really integrated into the society and they don't want to go back?
Thank you very much. And perhaps the last question this round. Last questions? Jean-Louis de.
Thank you very much, Gustavo, and thank you very much also for having convened this quite challenging today's meeting. As unfortunately I will not be able to stay until tomorrow with you, there will be others. I just wanted at the end of this panel to maybe share one concern. I know that it's shared by you, but maybe go back to the roots of what resilience is. And in a way, there is not now a formal copyright on the notion of resilience as far as the Union is concerned, because this definition has been blessed both by the institution I'm representing here tonight, that's the Commission of the European Union, but by the Council also at ministerial level. Half jokingly, I would say that it might sound a little bit paradoxical to refer to resilience in the present circumstances, because of course the meaning of resilience is also that it is a forward-looking concept. It is about preparing communities which are confronted with regular shocks to better face the next shock which will come afterwards, whether it is drought, whatever it is. Well, it's built back better, in other words. But okay, let's hope that these countries and these regions will not be faced with similar tragedies in the future. Now, coming back to a more serious past, there is one concept which is at the center, two concepts, which are at the center of the resilience agenda, and that's on one end the individuals, let alone the families or the communities, and on the other end the vulnerability notion. Whatever comes out of this very interesting and quite challenging forum, I think that it would be important to bear that in mind. We all agree that we must be forward-looking. We all agree that humanitarian emergency cannot stay the new normal for years. And it was said in no unclear terms. We all agree that it is about catering for the victims, but that amongst the victims are also the neighboring countries, the population of the neighboring countries, the governments of the neighboring countries, which have made tremendous efforts to be welcoming as they have been until now. But there are also the refugees, the displaced persons, whether they are in Syria or in the neighboring country. Resilience is a coin with two sides, the development side, and it was quite well highlighted underneath, and there were quite groundbreaking ideas, including food for oil, but okay, we can come back on that later if you wish. There were quite groundbreaking ideas about that. I was quite interested to hear what is being said about investment, about job creation, about trade facilities, about concessional loans. All that has to be further elaborated, but as one side of the coin, bearing in mind that there is the other side, and that as long as appropriate solution, comprehensive containment policies with regard to the humanitarian situation will not be in place or will not have been complemented, we are still not going to be there with a fully integrated resilience agenda. Thank you very much and good luck for tomorrow.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jean-Louis. We have 4 questions. The first one relates to which extent you consider yourself part of the region. The second one that relates to how we can make the most of all these efforts in terms of approaches, tools, and instruments for other crises. A quite important topic with political implications on forced migration. It means that when we recognize that refugees, they are going to stay more than expected, and some of them they risk some new policies that, let's say, force them to return not on a voluntary basis. And then the last intervention, that is to which extent we need to contextualize resilience for this crisis, and when resilience is put at the heart of this so-called integration between humanitarian and development. So, colleagues, yes, Sam.
Just very quickly on a couple of those questions. I think what's been established already is that the resilience approach, and sadly I think a little bit too late for this particular crisis that's now hitting its 5th year, is that the resilience mentality and approach, I think, could have been applied a little bit earlier in order to figure out if indeed it was possible to sustain this humanitarian response for 4 years. And now we're seeing less money and more need. I think the question is, had we applied a resilience approach or thought about it a little bit before, would it have been possible to, one, do better aid coordination between humanitarian and development, something that we would certainly benefit from inside Syria, include the private sector a little bit earlier, think about how development planning or early recovery planning in some cases merged or made coherent with the humanitarian responses. So I think while appreciating that resilience could be forward-looking, the actual definition that's been part of the UN Development Group's Resilience Guidance Note, it is about coping and recovery and sustainability. So that's something I think that in Syria we wonder about to a certain extent. Would it have made a difference had we actually tried to continue to attract a little bit of the development funding before we got to this point where 5 years into the crisis, we have a little bit of that coming in now. There are indeed, as it turns out, over the last year or year and a half, a lot of donors that are actually spending a little bit more and more inside Syria, having this particular perspective. The EU, among others, certainly been doing that, and the Swiss and others. So the question is now, how do we do more of that? And like Gustavo was saying, if everything has been tried already in relation to figuring out what to do with the refugee issue and how to support them either where they are or what to do with them when they get to Europe, the untried thing is to spend a little bit more money inside Syria and figure out if you can enable people to stay in places where they are safe or where they are being displaced for socioeconomic reasons, and maybe attract people to return, provided that it's safe and voluntary and sustainable to a great deal. So for us, I think resilience is always about now, and the simplest definition I think that you can go back to is the dictionary definition, which is flex but does not break. Can a community at this point flex but not break at the same time? We're seeing a lot of communities, when struggling a little bit, they actually break. This is what's happening in the region. The question is, in places where it's still possible, with a resilience investment, can you help these communities not break up and cause more suffering and disaster?
Thank you very much, Sam. You would like to add something? Yes, please.
I think I'll just go across all the questions real quick, because I think, I'll start with the last one first, actually, because it was a bit interesting about the idea of the forced returnees. Now, the context of Egypt, and I'm not sure if I can speak on behalf of all the others, but I'll let them answer, but I think my answer will be exactly the same like all others. Absolutely not. Because I think Egypt, just like the other host countries look at this issue not just from the lens of a refugee apparatus. It's not just a refugee issue, but rather a human rights issue. So whoever comes into your country, and whatever the situation may be, you will never force them back to a situation where they have to go back again to a protracted situation. So yes, as to your, I guess, annex part, yes, exactly, about giving them, naturalizing them or giving them passports, I think it's very premature to talk about such a thing when everybody's talking about hopefully reaching a political resolution and pushing for finding some kind of sustainable solution for Syria and a hope for the Syrians in the diaspora, whether they're displaced or seeking refuge, that one day they will be back to Syria. So to talk about giving them passports now is just really defeating the entire purpose. As to the definition of resilience, I just have a quick answer. If there was a dictionary for the RDF, I think we will just see the word dictionary, the word resilience in the dictionary being defined as the act of fishing rather than being given the fish. So this is resilience, and I think all of us want to be helped in being able to go ahead and fish. And just like Hannah was talking about in Lebanon, investments, to come and bring investments to inject growth for the host community. This is what is needed rather than just handing out aids, or if not, then it's impossible to talk about livelihood or creating jobs in such an absence of such a situation. As to lessons learned, absolutely, and I think the gentleman here from the UN Development Group was asking, absolutely, I think the lessons can be emulated everywhere in any other protracted conflict. Hopefully no other region will see such a complex, hopefully complex, and a crisis of such magnitude or nature. But if this is the case, yes, I think there will always be chapters and chapters of best practices with regard to what was going on in Syria.
I just want to come to the question about the applicability of what's coming out of this, the whole discussion on resilience and what is happening in this region. I think this is probably the first time over the last couple of years that there has been a discussion about looking at a crisis that is protracted and the impacts on neighboring countries and combining the humanitarian and development agenda. So having a medium term, a short and medium term and a long term approach. So yes, whatever comes out of this in terms of the tools and so on can be applicable. There are some common guiding principles that are coming out of the resilience agenda, which I think can be applicable anywhere. They are very common. But I think the point that I'd also like to make is it's about being able to find a balance on the issue of resilience, because there's so many countries represented here, and they're hosting different numbers of refugees, and the issue is it cannot be a one-size-fits-all approach. It has to take into consideration country specificities, because there are differences. So then the balance is, how do we coordinate at the regional level? How do we coordinate amongst countries when we know that there could be different ways in which we approach the issue, just because the situation in each country is pretty unique, it's different. So I think that's a balance that needs to be achieved when looking at coordination.
Thank you very much, Anita. And we have Kamal, and then a colleague from Egypt, Cecile, and Jordan. Please, Kamal.
Yeah, just on this, I don't know, is this working? Yeah, on the issue, the last point, I'll pick up from the last point Anita made, because I think in terms of your question about the applicability of this, yes, in a broad sense, but not in a specific sense, because every country is different. Let's say working to strengthen basic municipal services may be a generalized thing that is applicable, but how you do it and even what you do will have to vary country by country. You can't do it the same way. So I think that yes, what's being generated out of this will have value for other crises, but it will have to be sort of tailor-made to the specificities of that crisis and the specificities of the country. So that's one point I wanted to make. The other was just on this question about regional. Just speaking for Turkey, it doesn't neatly fit into any region, but it is a bridge between many regions. And I think in this crisis, as I said in my comments, Turkey is in a unique geographical location, and it seems to be a bridge. I mean, it has a 911 kilometer with Syria. It's a bridge to the Middle East on one side, but to Europe on the other side. And so it does have a very particular role, but it doesn't fit into, let's say, the rest of the region that is represented here as neatly. And certainly when we come to regions in our organizational context, Turkey is always in a different region. It's never in the same region. And that has been a challenge institutionally that one has had to deal with, as Gustavo knows. Okay.
Thank you, Kamal. Please.
With regard to this forced return issue, I can briefly say that in the entrance and regarding the exit of Syrians, our two main policies are non-refoulement and voluntary repatriation. So no other choice than these options are available for us. And of course, we'll continue to host Syrians until they are able to go back to their homeland. So this is the... Actually, the citizenship is another issue. You know that our definition of refugee is by legally it's impossible because we have geographical limitation to Geneva Convention 1951. So they are under temporary protection in Turkey.
Thank you. Hala.
Thank you. I think that I have mostly the same answer like different colleagues here, starting with Ahmad on more than one thing. I'm going to start directly with the naturalization. Naturally, that's not an option. We have to take into consideration one very important thing. Everybody now is referring to Europe, and we've been here for 4 years hosting these refugees. Europe is just getting introduced to this issue right now, even though we've been really trying to warn Europe that its role is coming next. But our context is different. Our abilities and capabilities are different than those of Europe. Putting aside that most of our countries cannot do this, cannot naturalize people. We do not have the ability to do that. We cannot pay per capita as much as Europe can. And even though Europe today is also complaining about the cost of resettling and giving naturalization to people. But we do believe that Syrians will return, and that Syrians will want to return. And one of the main reasons is what Sam referred to and what we've been also really advocating for, and that's investment inside Syria. Trying as much as possible to look for places inside Syria where investment can take place. And we all know, all of us who are from the region, who know our countries, know that there are places inside Syria that could be invested in. There are places where people can go back to safely if we provide them with those opportunities. So this is what we should focus on. Instead of looking at how we put more pressure on the host countries to keep those refugees there, we should not continue thinking about uprooting people from their land. We should think about how to return those people to their land and to invest in those areas, because it is possible and we can do it. And ultimately, the only comprehensive solution, comprehensive containment solution, is a solution inside Syria, is a political solution for Syria. That's the only solution. Regarding the context, I think we all know that we have a lot of different contexts in every country, and I think that this crisis in particular has taught each and every one of us, especially the UN agencies, that you cannot bring your experience and implement it as it is in our countries. Each country is different, each country has a different context, and I think if there is one place that people can learn from it's this crisis, because we can all learn from our mistakes in this crisis. We can all learn from waiting and waiting and waiting before we move forward with resilience and with supporting the host countries. But there are a lot of things that we can build on, and I think other areas can build on the experiences of this. But it's not always possible to just take experiences from outside and try to implement them in countries. As for the regional thing, I do agree. What's missing is we do have a lot of initiatives. We have the 3RP, today we have the RDF. We have the UN always bringing the region together. What is missing is actually having the governments coming together and working together. It's not only about initiatives by the UN, it's also governments talking together, not necessarily being in the same region geographically or institutionally, but it's more about direct dialogue with all due respect and with how much we appreciate all that the UN has been doing. It's also time for the governments to start looking at how we can respond to all of this together. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, because it gives the chance of recognizing now that the RDF is perhaps for the first time we are contributing to this sort of intergovernmental dialogue with regards to the Syria crisis. Thank you, Hala. And we have perhaps the last intervention from the floor.
Still there.
Sorry. Oh, sorry. Please.
You was keeping ignoring. Thank you. Actually, I totally agree with Hala she's mentioning. And actually, I would like to highlight few comments that we are in Jordan dealing with the refugees under the MOU signed with the UNHCR. And according to this MOU, there is an article that says that during or after 1 year, the refugees should be resettled in third country or find any solution for it. So far, the government of Jordan, we always look into the refugees issue from a humanitarian aspect, and we never apply or implement this article, because we do believe that this is our role, humanitarian role on behalf of the international community. As well, also we have keep on our open border policy with Syria. So regarding the other part of was mentioned from our colleague from the Swedish agency, if there is any potentiality for giving them citizenship, we totally support a political solution in Syria, and they can go home for a better life and better future. Because I believe not Syrian refugees, any refugees in the world, they are always looking for a better life, a better future. So I believe the better life, the better future, they can find it in their own life.
Thank you. And Jordan has a long history of hospitality, so very much recognizing what you just said.
Regarding the refugee issue, I agree with all my colleagues here, and we have the same policy in Kurdistan region. Regarding the IDPs, it is a different issue. We are unique in that because internally displaced, they have came from the other territory, especially from disputed area and from the area that is under the central government, like Nineveh, Ramadi, Salahuddin and other areas. So to the extent that they will not have any conflict with the national security and national interest, they are our brothers, and we keep supporting them, and the doors have been open for them, and even for access to the job and business, they have been free at the first moment, and we have nothing to do that. Out of these questions, one suggestion, or it is a question and suggestion. Refugees and IDPs, they are aware of this resilience program. We are talking about their future, about their life, and to what extent it has been. If it is not, I hope that after we have a consolidated ideas, objectives, and something finalized, or even before the last update, let's say, to be shared with them in a manner that they will be contributing to their future and their life. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the recommendation. I think it's one of the definition of resilience is precisely that it's people-centered, and you are right. let's say those that benefit from resilience investment should be part of the decision-making process. We have a last intervention from the private sector, Egypt. Please introduce yourself.
The organization I represent is kind of in contradiction with my comment. I am the president of the American Chamber of Commerce in Egypt. I have two naive observations that are politically naive, and I'm trying to trigger the Ministry of Foreign Affairs here. Regardless of cause and effect, and I must have missed something. I haven't seen any American representation here, or Canadian representation. And I haven't seen any of those. We are talking to people who have problems, to deal with the problems, the countries that in the area, but I haven't seen any Kuwaiti or Saudi. Would you care to comment on this?
First of all, we would like to. No, it was challenging the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Invitation, no,
No, I'm saying that they're not represented here. I would have expected the Americans to be here, or the Canadians to be here, the Kuwaitis to be here, or the Saudis to be here.
There are. Well, first
I missed
of all,
something.
tomorrow we have representative from the country that you have just mentioned. We have part of the delegation. We have a GCC representation. Tomorrow is the ministerial segment of the RDF, and some of the donors that you have just mentioned, they participated in round tables. No, you mentioned Canada. We have even a working lunch with Kuwait to discuss the coming London conference. So they are part of this exercise. In this case, we have representatives from the region, the 6 countries affected by the Syria crisis. But I'm sure, I think that we have one of the roundtables on sustainable livelihoods and employment. We have an American NGOs. So I would like to assure you that the GCC and other Arab countries, they are taking part in the RDF. Colleagues, I don't have time to wrap up this for 2 reasons. The first one, I think, is time, and the second one is this was a quite rich, very rich debate, very rich presentation. And you have the opportunity to access the country reports, the summary reports in our website, RDF. So let me just thank our distinguished panelists, the delegation from Turkish, the UN country in Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Iraq, and Egypt. And please join me in thanking my colleagues for the high quality of the presentation and for leading the country consultation. Thank you, colleagues. We have a reception. I don't know if I'm against the protocol, but everyone is invited to the reception, and it's going to take place at 8 p.m.